Well, thank you for tuning into another episode of Keep It Fictional from the Port Moody Public Library. We are recording this episode during spring break in Port Moody, and allegedly spring is here, even though it is still freezing cold outside. And as I'm walking to work today, I still see little patches of snow that is on the ground. That was from a couple weeks ago. So it is too cold to feel like spring just yet. But I would love to know, how do my book friends feel about spring? Is this a season that excites you? Sadie, what do you think about spring?
I don't mind spring. Fall is my favorite season, and I do quite enjoy winter. So I'd say spring probably comes in a solid third, and that's mainly because it means that it's almost summer, and I absolutely hate summer. So spring I see as like a gateway to summer, and that just makes me really, really sad. But in past years, I have started to enjoy the flowers and the cherry blossoms and that aspect of spring, not having to bundle up quite as much as you do in winter. But yeah, it's an okay season in my mind. It does have my birthday, so that is a bonus. So, but it's okay. It's okay.
I totally agree. It is just an indication that summer is coming, and I hate it. And so, yeah, summer is the worst. So it would be also in a third, kind of place for me. I also think that, like, when I think about spring, I have very like singular memories in Hong Kong of like it really being humid. And because Hong Kong, a lot of the floors is like tile, so going to school, you just remember this really wet floors everywhere. And then if you drop something on the floor, it's disgusting. Like you pick up your notebook and it's like all black now because of the grossness. That's what I think about when I think about spring. So I had no good memories of it. So yeah. Fiona.
Yeah, so I'm actually a pretty big fan of spring. For the most part, my favorite season is the one that is coming next, with the exception of summer. I don't like heat and I don't like rain, but I do like flowers. So, there is a lot of rain in spring, but there's also a lot of rain all the time in Vancouver. So I'm not even sure that it's like particularly a spring thing when it comes to Vancouver. Yeah.
How about you, Mark?
I I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who will say summer is their favorite. Um, because I like the sun. I don't like the rain and the cold, the damp. It's just I don't know if it's because I've lived in so many places that are just not good during the winter, where it's just like it feels bad all the time, just cold and damp and everything like that. So then in the summer, it's a nice change. Um, Plus just also in general, um, I would say I like the outdoors probably more than the other people on this podcast, perhaps. So being able to go outside a lot during the summer is very nice. Whereas like during the fall and winter, and even to a certain extent the spring, you can't really do very much of that in Metro Vancouver. So being able to do more of that for that one season, kind of feels like a special thing.
Oh, you can have all the sun you want. You can have all the heat. You can enjoy it for all of us. Corinne, what is spring to Corinne?
Spring, I have to refer to one of my poetic influences of my mother, who's every time I think of spring, I think of the poem that she taught us. Spring has sprung, the grass is riz. I wonder where your father is. So it kind of evokes a strange kind of like melancholy and sadness. Strangely enough, spring, ambivalent. But I don't mind summer because I'm always cold, and in summer I am finally warm. But spring contains one of my very favorite times of the entire year, which is the cherry blossom season. I love cherry blossom season. I had never experienced anything like it until I came to Vancouver, and just like the explosion of color, and it makes you feel like transported into like a floating world, like for a brief amount of time, like it's magical. And so I look forward to spring. I do look forward to spring for that exact reason.
Great. And if you ever, listeners, if you ever come to Port Moody, there's definitely lots of beautiful cherry blossoms right in front of our library. So we get to enjoy that every single spring. Which of course begs the question, why am I hosting this episode? Because I don't like spring. But anyway, I think it's because when we think of spring, like you all mentioned, we think about like things growing, like plants, green stuff growing out. And I'm assuming that I got really excited about like, killer plants and creepy mushrooms. Like that's probably where my mind went. So I'm like, oh, like I should host this episode. I don't know. But I hope that all of you have managed to find a plant book, because that is our topic for today, books that heavily feature plants and mushrooms. And hopefully one of you will find a book, you have found a book that you enjoy that has plants and stuff in it. So we are going to go to Fiona first because I added the mushroom parts just for them. So what kind of book do you have for us today?
Well, as a matter of fact, I have a mushroom book for you. So thank you for that. And let me tell you, after this book, I am a convert to mushrooms. Mushrooms are cool. They're super cool. So I read Entangled Life, How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures by Merlin Sheldrake, which Merlin Sheldrake, what a name for a mushroom biologist. And as you can see, I liked this one so much, I immediately put it onto my staff picks. Merlin Sheldrake is a biologist, and I sort of saw this as sometimes when you're writing, they tell you to have two notebooks, one for your project and then one for your thoughts around your project. And it really felt like that. This is a biologist doing work in the field, but these are his thoughts about culture and philosophy and all of these other parts, which is my favorite kind of popular science book. I will say that when I love reading popular science, but I usually understand about 10 to 20% of it. I actually learn. And I'd say that was about what I learned from this was about 10%. The other stuff kind of went over my head, and there are still probably some mushroom and fungi basics that I'm not I haven't quite grasped. But the fact that is very macro and it was quite philosophical, I feel like I got a lot of that picture. And so basically what he's writing about is how important fungi is to our world, and particularly mycelium. That's the little roots from the fungi. And the mushrooms themselves are actually just the fruiting bodies. But the important thing about mycelium is that it basically it's this connected, these interconnected paths, and they're not just connected to each other and other fungi, but to bacteria and to other plants. Karine, I think, has a bit of a fear of mushrooms. So I know that all of this talking is really upsetting her. And if you are also someone who is bothered by mushrooms, it's okay if you fast forward this part. If you are not, I definitely encourage you to convert to mushrooms because they are so cool. One of my favorite things that I learned in this is that lichen are actually this. Okay, lichen. So we all know about symbiotic relationships, and this actually came originally from when they discovered that a lichen is a symbiotic relationship between an algae and a fungi. And they really sort of expanded the ideas around biology because it was this idea that not everything is fixed. And again, I don't have the vocabulary to explain that in a more specific way, but the fact that a fungi can basically that a lichen can configure itself in different ways because it's made up of more than one thing. It kind of, it changed this idea of us seeing things as very individual. And I think understanding that is key to fungi. Okay. I also really enjoyed the chapters on there's one on truffles. I'd die for the taste of truffles. And it did actually go into some of that about the farmers who they have these cases where a farmer might shoot somebody on their property because they're trying to steal their truffles, and how their weight is like worth more than gold. So it's like very like kind of intense, this like whole culture around truffles. And he actually does go into the field and learn about the dogs who smell the truffles and everything. It was really interesting, but also kind of made me realize that I just want to stay on the fringes. I just want to eat the truffles. I definitely don't want to grow the truffles or get into that like whole dark side. It does go quite a lot into psychedelics, and I think that you probably can't you probably don't spend your life learning about fungi unless you have some interest in psychedelics. So I do really appreciate that the author was able to both express their interest and fascination with that without like, you know, getting too far into like everybody should do an ayahuasca ceremony. But that was actually, yeah, quite an interesting chapter. Like I said, it does go a lot into the history and sort of these polarizing moments in the history of biology, where people were like, no, there's no way that fungi can be that complex, and then all of these discoveries throughout time. So it was a really nice balanced book. It does at times, I think about 3/4 of the way through, it dragged for me a little bit, but then it picked back up and really had a good flow to it. He talks a lot about his engagement with other people in the field and is able to kind of bring their voices into it. And again, I really appreciated that, just this sort of macro picture of, you know, not just looking at a zoomed in idea of fungi, but this whole like culture of people who surround themselves with fungi, and yeast was also a big part of it, like brewers and stuff. And so this culture of people who are really dedicated to learning more about it. Oh, and also there's a great chapter on fabrication using mycelium. So all of these things that they can make out of it, like, which is like pretty much anything that you can imagine. And I'm really excited to see in the future whether that takes off, you know, whether we're all having mycelium leather and mycelium chairs and all of this stuff, or whether it turns out to be a little bit of a fad. So if you do enjoy popular science, this is a really, really readable book that will take you down a rabbit hole that maybe you didn't know that you wanted to go down. That was where I was at. It was the hold that showed up at the right time for this podcast. But I am really, really glad that it did. That is Entangled Life: How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures by Merlin Sheldrake.
Is there a chapter on the Smurfs?
I don't think the Smurfs are ever mentioned.
Well, then it's missing something clearly. Well, thank you for that. Very excited. I'm glad to see how excited you are about mushrooms, and I'm also not glad to see, but how grossed out some other book friends are about all the things that you have said, especially the term fruiting bodies. Oh, right. Okay, so let's maybe move off mushrooms. I don't know. We'll find out. Sadie, what kind of plant mushrooms book do you have for us?
All right. I do not have mushrooms. Don't worry, Karine. No mushrooms are going to be mentioned in the talk of my book. I have chosen a historical mystery that I stumbled upon because I saw that the sequel was coming out, and I read the description of the sequel and it looked interesting. And then I realized that it was not, in fact, the first book of the series. And while I buy second books, I do not start reading the second book, causing Karine a whole bunch of more struggles with that. So I went in search of the first book of this series, and that is A Botanist's Guide to Parties and Poison. So this book takes place in London in 1923, and it follows Saffron Everleigh. And Saffron Everleigh is a newly appointed research assistant. She is working for her mentor and fellow botanist, Dr. Maxwell, at the University College of London. This is a position that, as a woman, Saffron has had to fight for, and she continues to have to fight for both her research and herself to be taken seriously by pretty much everybody at the university, apart from maybe a couple people. Dr. Maxwell is one of them that has always believed in her. But Saffron loves botany. Saffron loves her research. Her father was a botanist before he died in World War I. And so Saffron has decided to dedicate her life to botany to carry on his vision and to carry on his love. So she is happy where she is, at least for now. She has ambitions to go farther, to do further research, and she just hopes that as a woman in the university, she will have that opportunity. So one night, Saffron is attending a dinner party. They're going to celebrate the university's expedition, a very large expedition to the Amazon. And this expedition is headed by Professor Dr. Henry, very enigmatic kind of professor, loved by all of the women, even though he is married. His wife does not really appreciate that, as Saffron views at this dinner party, as Dr. Henry is talking very closely with another woman. But this party goes on much in the usual way as these events do. There's some polite conversation, it's mingled with some salacious gossip, and it all ends with a lovely champagne toast to toast the expedition and wish everyone luck. They're setting off in a few weeks. So Saffron decides that after this toast, she is ready to go, but she would like to wish her hosts good night and to thank them for a lovely evening. So she heads over to them, and they are standing with Dr. Henry, the expedition leader, along with his wife and one of the financial backers of the expedition. Saffron is just about to wish her hosts good night when Mrs. Henry takes one final sip of champagne and promptly collapses to the ground, as you do at these types of events. Being told that it must just be an allergic reaction to something that Mrs. Henry ate, Saffron does return home and goes into work the next day, not really expecting anything to be out of the ordinary. That's not the case, though. Shortly after Saffron arrives, so does a police detective, and the detective is there to question Dr. Maxwell. Before Saffron knows what's happening, Dr. Maxwell is being arrested for the attempted murder of Mrs. Henry, with the detectives claiming that a rare and very poisonous plant that Maxwell brought back from an expedition many, many years ago is what poisoned Mrs. Henry. It also comes out that Dr. Maxwell was seen having a very loud, very big argument with Dr. Henry after being told that he was not allowed to come on this new expedition. Saffron is shocked. Saffron doesn't really know what to do here. She does not believe the accusations against Dr. Maxwell, regardless of the argument that he had and this plant that's being claimed as the poison. Saffron knows Dr. Maxwell very well and knows that he would never, ever use his plants to poison anyone. So the only thing that Saffron can think to do is to figure out who the actual murderer is. Now, as a botanist and a researcher, she decides that the best place to start is with the plant itself. This plant she knows a little bit about, but not a lot. So she goes in search of Dr. Maxwell's research. The police has taken most of it, but she does find one notebook which outlines a test that was done many, many years ago to determine what this plant actually does when it is consumed. She wants to provide a bit more up-to-date and first-hand research. So, logically, Saffron decides the best way to do this and to prove that the symptoms are not a match for Mrs. Henry's is to consume the plant herself. As a researcher, she's going to make note of all of the things that happened to her. She will then be able to take that to the police and show them, see, this is not what poisoned Mrs. Henry. So she sets about making a liquid that has the leaves steeped into it. She takes the drinks the liquid and sets down in Maxwell's office to wait for what happens. Now, this is where her fellow researcher and biologist Alexander Ashton finds Saffron, as she is slowly losing the ability to use her limbs. She has been ready for this. She knows based on the notes that this could happen. There is also going to be a creeping blue line that's going to go up her body, that's going to go in line with the paralysis. Once the blue line stops and starts to retreat, then she will get the use of her limbs back. Not really knowing what to do, wanting to call a doctor, but being talked out of it, Ashton decides that he has no choice but to sit there and wait with Saffron as she completes her experiment. Saffron is in fact correct. The lines disappear, her movement comes back, and she knows now for a fact that this is not what poisoned Mrs. Henry. So with the help of Alexander Ashton, Saffron sets out to try and figure out who the actual murderer is. So this is a very fun book. Saffron is a very single-minded, strong female protagonist. As you all know, I really like those kinds of characters. She's got a lot of character. She's got a lot of humor. But she also has some trauma in her past that she's able to bring into her character. Alexander Ashton as well is not just your typical kind of leading man, love interest. He fought in the war and he's dealing with quite a bit of PTSD that comes up throughout this novel. The author also brings in themes of sexism and sexual harassment. Saffron is constantly having to fight, as I said, for her place at the university. She has been put into positions with the head of her department where she is being made out to look like someone who is trying to sleep her way to the top, which is not what has happened at all. And it is actually the opposite, where her university department head has been trying to harass her and assault her. So there's these underlying themes in this story, but on the top of it, it is a really kind of fun story where Saffron just kind of crawls around in gardens trying to find poisonous plants and takes poisons herself to try and figure out if they are in fact what has poisoned someone. So yeah, if you're looking for kind of a fun, more lighthearted historical mystery with a little bit of poisonous plants in it, then I would highly recommend A Botanist's Guide to Parties and Poisons.
Thank you, Sadie. The things we do in the name of research, apparently. Yeah. And it sounds like a familiar setup, like, when you're describing it, but, it's nice to hear that, they throw something different into it. And I just have to ask, Miss Corinne, a room would you rather be in? A room full of mushrooms or a room full of second books, second book in series? Which is more horrifying to you? I just have to ask.
Okay, but here's the thing. If the room is just all second books in a series, then that is pleasing, because they are all the same, because they're all second books. And so that in and itself is like a collection of seconds, which is pleasing to the brain.
Okay.
Mushrooms, however, want you dead.
All right, now we know. All right. Well, seeing that Sadie has decided to take a break from young adult fantasy, I thought I will fill in that today, just for today. So I have got a young adult urban fantasy duology for you. Both books are out now. It is, I know, this the people are too shocked about what I'm reading today, apparently. So both of the books are out for this duology. The first book is called This Poison Heart, and the second book is called This Wicked Fate, and they are both by Kalynn Bayron. And Kalynn is the author of Cinderella is Dead. And her latest book just came out a couple of weeks ago, I think. It's called My Dear Henry, a Jekyll and Hyde remix. So as you can probably tell from the titles, that she's big on doing retelling of familiar stories and folktales. And This Poison Heart, the book that we have today, is also a remix, sort of setting a Greek mythology story in our world. But I'm not going to tell you which mythology it is, because I think it comes up sort of later in the book, so I don't want to spoil that for you. But I would assume that if a lawyer knock on your door and say, hey, well, actually, a lawyer won't say, hey, but a lawyer told you that a distant relative has passed away and they have left you everything. I would assume that this would be welcoming news. I mean, other than the part that somebody died, this is welcoming news and a pleasant surprise, probably. And that is how Briseis and her family felt when they were informed that Briseis' aunt, that she has never met, that she didn't even know existed, has passed away and has left her everything. And this everything included a giant family mansion and 40 acres of land in a town called Rhinebeck, which is about a 2-hour drive outside of New York, where they lived. So on the one hand, this is really good timing because everything's getting more and more expensive. Rents for their apartment, rents for their flower shop that Briseis' mother's own, everything is going up and they could really use the money. But on the other hand, Briseis is not really prepared for this and it's like not really sure how to deal with it or how to feel about it because Briseis is adopted and she has never really felt the urge to learn more about her birth family. This is something that she just never really feel like she needs to know. She knows that her mom is no longer alive, but that's kind of about it. So she's not really sure about this opportunity that, she knows that she's going to get to go to the birth family home, which means there's going to be a lot of things that, like maybe that belongs to her birth family that and she just doesn't sure what she wants to do with this. And her moms have made it really clear to her it is entirely her decision. They will support whatever she wants to do. If she wants to just forget all about this, they will be happy to do that. If she wants to visit the house and see what that's like, they're also happy to go along. It's completely up to her. And so Briseis, after thinking for it a bit, decides to do what she thinks is right for her family, which is to check out the house and see what it's like. The plan is to spend the summer there, and then at the end of the summer, they can decide, like, do they want to move there permanently? Do they like the town? They can figure it out then, but just to give it a chance. And like I mentioned, Briseis is not really particularly interested in her birth family or learning more about them, but she does want to find out why she can do what she can do. To say that Briseis has a green thumb is like a really, really like a big understatement because Briseis can always make plants grow. This is power that she seems to have. Even she remember even when she was really little, the first time this happened, she was like left in the room with a bunch of like potted plants, and then her mom was in the kitchen, and when she came to check in on Briseis, she found Briseis tangle up in all sorts of vines and things like that because she just made them grow without knowing how. And that's something that she can do. Give her a few minutes, give her a couple seeds, and then plants will just come up. Not only that, plants tend to react to her presence. They respond to her feelings accordingly. So if she's walking down like a corridor of trees, and if you pay attention, you find the trees all kind of leaning towards her. Or if she's having a picnic outside, having a great time, and you'll notice that the grass that she's sitting on gets a little greener. They feel a little fresher, like something changes. And Briseis tries to be really careful with herself and try to really keep her emotions in check because the city is, crowded. There's lots of people watching all the time. And she knows that this weird people out when they see that the plants are moving and they don't really understand why. In fact, she's pretty sure that some of her friends or some would-be friends probably distance themselves when they notice that there's something strange going on. And that makes it really, really hard for her to make friends. And she also feels like she can't be herself. And she loves plants, like she tries her best to learn and read as much as she can about them. And that's kind of what she wants to study eventually. And she feels especially attracted to poisonous plants too. So she really wants to try to learn a little bit more about like, well, how come I can do this? And maybe to have a chance to experiment a little bit more about her powers, which is hard to do in the city, but not so hard when you have 40 acres of land that you can experiment with. So that is something that she's quite looking forward to, just to get maybe some clues. Maybe her birth family's house will give her some clues on, like why she has this power. And boy, does she find clues in the house. It's way more than she expected. But they bring in more questions than answers, definitely. The house being ginormous, has so many rooms, so many hallways, so many locked doors that she has to try to figure out like what's in all of them and what secrets do they hide. Also, the acres and acres of land, there's forests, there's woods, there's gardens within gardens. There's so many secret places. And that Briseis is trying to like, there's so many clues, but they're all like one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And she's trying to like figure out like, what does it all mean? And there's so many things that she doesn't seem to understand. Her aunt has also left her 3 envelopes, and they contain these cryptic clues of things that she has to do in secret. So, like, go find this, and then go here, and then do this, and then open the second envelope. So it's like she's being sent on a scavenger hunt to kind of try to figure out, like, and what is her aunt trying to tell her? And as she's getting a bit more of an idea of what her birth family does, maybe some of it try to explain why she has this plant power, some of them doesn't really. She's getting a little more and more confused about sort of what is going on. And things just are not what they seem. But it's not just the family that has all the secrets. The town itself is also super secretive. It seems like everyone there she met, they're all like hiding something, or they know about something that she doesn't, and they look at her like in a weird way. And as more and more people find out that, oh, a family has moved into that big mansion, they all come to visit. But it's not like your welcoming party that they come. They show up at the middle of the night. They just sort of stand under some trees staring at the house. And so when you're looking out from the window, when you hear noises, you find all these strangers sort of like just standing there staring at you. And she just trying to figure like, what do you want? What do you people want from us? So that is something that she has to figure out. So definitely a book for readers who love family secrets, who love mysteries. And I think the other thing that is really nice about the book, maybe as an adult reading a young adult book, it is just so refreshing to see like that the parents are present, that they are there, they're 100%. You know that they have Briseis back. She can always turn to her moms if she needs anything. It's just such a safe relationship. You know that she can tell her moms anything and they will be there for her. So that is like quite nice to have. And of course, this is also a book if you like a little bit of romance, which I don't. But that's just me. But at least in the first book that I've read so far, it's more like an infatuation rather than like a full-on romance. So I'm sure it will develop in the second book. So if you like that part in a teen young adult fantasy, then this is probably something that you can get behind. I would say the only complaint that I have is I felt the book rushed through a lot of things in the end. And, everything was like kind of like a nice pace, you're building up. And so the tone at the end and the pacing, it's a little jarring. It was also like weird because part of the ending is quite intense and it's a little bit more maybe like horrifying and gruesome than I expected. And I wasn't preparing for that because the whole book wasn't like that. So it feels a little out of place. So I'm assuming that at the end of like the next book will kind of maybe resolve some of that. Because it's a little strange right now, I find. And also on top of that, there's inklings that something is up. And this something is something that we'll probably could talk about next week in our episode. But it just doesn't feel quite right. It's not really playing out the way I thought it would. So I think other than the ending, I think the rest of the book is a really good kind of like a start of the story, learning a little, for anyone who loves magic, love mysteries, like I said. This is also a story that sort of explores the idea of like who gets to tell a story, like the myths that we have, the folktales, the fables, and history even. Who gets to tell them? Who gets to shape them so that they are being used to explain things, to justify maybe how the society or how the world is the way it is. And so it explores a little bit of that. And like many books these days, kind of take some of those familiar stories and try to look at it from a different point of view. So if that's the kind of sort of theme that you like to explore, then this would be also a great book. So check out this Poison Heart by Kalynn Bayron. The book won in a young adult duology. All right. So before we head into the other two books with Mark and Corinne, let's get to our existential question of the day. So my question for my book friends is, do you have a favorite, or you can also do least favorite or least favorite, plant or tree or flower or fungi or whatever? Like, do you have something that, yeah, maybe I can guess what some of the answers might be. Maybe, I don't know. Mark.
I think for me, it's much easier to name a least favorite than a favorite for plants. So I'm going to go with the Western skunk cabbage, which is like a very smelly like cabbage that grows out in the wild. As from the name, you can kind of guess. Essentially, if you step on it, it starts making a bad smell. There's many of these like in parts of the lower mainland. If you go like off the trails and like some of the parks and places like that, these things do grow around here. So be prepared if you see these big yellow flowery blooming things. It's actually a very stinky plant.
Fiona looks horrified.
Yeah. And just like, I don't know. There's so many plants, and like I'm always alarmed that like I didn't know about that, but then also not, because there's so many plants, which is also my answer. I love plants a lot, but I don't have a green thumb. I'm not good at growing them or keeping them alive, but like ferns, ivy, daisies, I don't know, like all plants are good plants, but I'm gonna have to go with Corinne and say that the very best are cherry blossoms. They're just otherworldly, like just amazing.
Is that your answer too, Corinne?
So I'm like a maximalist in life. So yes, if I had to choose favorite tree, it's definitely cherry blossoms, because obviously, although plum blossoms coming in like a good second, unlike Fiona, I couldn't care less about plants. I just don't care. When my roommate talks about gardening, I have to like pinch myself, like pay attention, care. But if I had to go for like favorite flower, it's definitely peonies, because they're just like a lot. They're there, they're in your face, they're huge, they're the size of dinner plates, and you can probably like kill a man with one.
Always goes back to that. Can this thing be a weapon? Yes? Great. Sadie.
First, I do want to say, Mark, we had a lot of skunk cabbage in Nelson, so yeah, I'm familiar with it, and there was a whole field, and when you would drive by it, you would be able to smell it. It was terrible. It was terrible. Similar to Fiona, I do not have a green thumb. I try so desperately, and I kill so horribly. I've had people confiscate plants from me before with the promise that they would bring them back to me once they had livened it up again. It never comes back. I don't think that's because they couldn't bring it back to life. I think it's because they do not trust me to take care of it. I've tried to grow many avocado pits over the years. They have thrived, and then they have died horrible, horrible, horrible deaths. I think from childhood, this has stayed with me. My favorite flower is a tiger lily. I just like, they used to grow naturally by my school, my elementary school, and I used to love them. I think it comes back to my love of fall colors, and that kind of like orange color just reminds me of that. But yeah, I do. I so want to be able to grow things. My dad is an amazing gardener, and I try so hard. Maybe Evie will get the gene that has been passed down from her grandfather, and thinking maybe it skips a generation. And maybe she will be able to create and maybe teach me how not to kill plants.
Nice. I have no feelings about trees and plants. They're fine. They're there. I could care less about flowers. Flowers are completely pointless in my mind. I hate them. Pointless. But yeah, trees fine. Trees are good. But there's one tree that I'm scared of, and I don't know why. It's the monkey puzzle tree. I find them really creepy. Like, I feel like whatever those things are that is like kind of bare, I feel like they're going to like, like creep behind you, and it's going to like strangle you or something. So I do not like them. So I walk around them. That's one tree that I will walk around, cross the road, so that I don't have to be near them. It's the monkey puzzle tree. So
Do you ever play the game with them where if you see one and you're with someone, you have to pinch them?
No.
No?
No.
No? Mm-hmm.
When I see one, I run away, so I don't have time for games. But no, I never heard of that.
Kind of similar to like the Volkswagen Beetle game where like you see someone, you give them like a, yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, the monkey tree game.
They have like a really malevolent aura. It's just something about it. Like they feel like a murderer.
Yeah, they do. And I believe them have murdered a lot of people if you're not paying attention. So yeah.
And
Okay.
to my knowledge, I don't think we have them in other parts of the country. So it's a little bit alarming when you come here and you're like, what
Really?
is that
Oh.
monster?
I literally did a double take the first time I saw one because I was walking by someone's yard. I was like, what the hell? Like, because it's big and gloomy and sharp and angry. Yeah, and I'd never seen anything like that before. It looks like it comes out of like the Jurassic period.
I'm so glad that I'm not the only one. What people would be like, what are you talking about? They're great. Oh, you. Okay. So yeah, no, they are creepy. Okay, good. We agree on something. That monkey puzzle trees are
But this
creepy.
does seem to raise the question of who are these people who keep them in their yards then, if everyone finds them so creepy. Who are these people who keep these trees around?
Better than security. Keeps people away from the house. It's the only point of them. Anyway, well, thank you for sharing that. All kinds of plants and flowers. Yeah, so listeners, let us know what is your favorite or least favorite. What do you find creepy? All right, Corinne, your book for today, is it a creepy plant book or a regular plant book?
I actually do find these plants creepy. Again, because of where I grew up in like northern Alberta, I had never seen one before until I moved here, and I was like, oh, that's ugly. Really, really ugly, and I really don't care for it. So this book was a mild struggle. So in Sri Lanka, there is an orchid called the Padu flower. Sorry to all the orchid enthusiasts out there. I'm about to butcher some names. And this flower is so rare and fragile. It can only be grown there. It blooms at midnight and perishes by dawn. It has been described as priceless. Anyone who could clone this flower and share it with the world would be a millionaire several times over. I say this because the Shenzhen, non-ke orchid sold for 160,000 pounds for a flower, an ugly flower. So in 1994, someone with dreams of these millions named John LaRoche and 3 members of the Seminole tribe crept into the, and again, apologize, Fakahatchee Strand State Preserve in southern Florida, which is a nature reserve, crept in and started to poach ghost orchids. This is a very rare type of orchid that is only found in this particular area. And the real kicker with it is as soon as you take it out of that area, it dies. But John LaRoche is not daunted by that because he has a secret plan and/or formula where he's going to clone these ghost orchids and make himself and the Seminole tribe a lot of money. And by doing this, he will ensure the preservation of the ghost orchid because poaching will no longer be necessary. Does this sound like a wild plan? Yes. Does this story also take place in Florida? Also, yes. So, this is the slightly unhinged story of the Orchid Thief. Our journalist, Susan Orlean, who recently wrote the library book that Liz raved about on the podcast, and I also have loved, follows the story of John LaRoche, and also delves into the history and mystery. The mystery is mostly on my part. I don't understand why people pay money for them. The mystery of orchids. So John LaRoche believed that he had found some sort of loophole in the law that no one had thought of, in that Seminole First Nations people were not subject exactly to the same laws surrounding endangered species of everyone else. He believed this because the tribe chairman, James Billy, had shot a panther. here's the line of logic we're going with, people. And LaRoche had a long history of being interested in collecting. He's a horticulturalist, but he has a string of, one could call them obsessions, something that he gets really, really into as a collector. Before it was fossils, but now he is obsessed with collecting orchids. Flowers. They're flowers. He is obsessed with collecting orchids. The different types of them, he is having them sent off from different corners of the world to his greenhouse. And the ghost orchid becomes his entire world. This idea and project of being able to take this rare flower, clone it, make the money, and save it becomes his entire world. And he draws Susan Orlean into this obsession. John LaRoche believes that he is smarter than everyone else, even though he accidentally put a bunch of pesticide on an open wound and is dying from it. But he knows better than the government and every scientist that has ever been. Sorry. And for some reason, people are willing to go with it. He convinces the Seminole tribe to build a giant greenhouse on their land with a huge laboratory in order to clone these flowers to make money. They just have to get the plants first, which they will have to do illegally, but it's fine. So orchids are a big business. I don't think I actually had any idea how much of a big business they were until I really read this book. Individual specimens or plants can go for hundreds of thousands of dollars. There are conventions that you can go to, and this is big money. And where there's big money, there's crime. And so orchid smuggling and theft, oh yeah, you heard that right, stealing a flower from someone else, is a thing, and not just a small isolated incident. It's a widespread phenomenon of stealing someone's plants because collectors are bananas. This book also delves into the fact that the history of orchids is the history of theft and colonialism. You wouldn't necessarily tie the idea of a single flower to this larger idea, but it is that. The history of orchid hunters is the history of rich white Europeans going into foreign territories and stealing their flowers, often in the process killing them. The orchid hunters would go into places like Peru, take all of the flowers, send them back in boxes, upon which all of these amazing specimens would die on the way there. They would open the box and find it full of dead flowers. In order to steal better, they started to develop more scientific understanding of how plants work. And oftentimes these orchid hunters would travel across the globe at great personal danger, many of them dying in the pursuit, and I cannot emphasize this enough, of flowers. Ugly, ugly flowers. And ladies weren't even allowed to look at them because they looked too much like lady parts. So it was only the men who were deemed responsible enough to look at these flowers and work with them. In addition, Orlean talks about the Fakahatchee Preserve and how that came to be, and ties it into the history of Florida, which is, you know, the butt of many jokes. And she kind of makes the case that for a reason, this particular area was only preserved because it was part of a scam real estate deal. At some point, they had this. It's a swamp. It's the most terrifying place on the history of the it's horrifying. She describes it as just like, and I don't like using this word. It's maybe even worse than fruiting bodies, but only just. It's a very fecund area full of all the plants and all the snakes and all of the bugs. It's an area where a surveyor in 1872, who was kind of meant to like take stock of this particular area, looked around and said, it is just a pond full of monstrous alligators. He got to 50 in one area and just stopped. It is a piece of land that some people went into and just started crying. When asked why, he just looked around and said it was too much. Too much. So this particular area of land was sold off to kind of clueless, thriving people in the north of the States, thinking that this would be a beautiful suburb. But of course, it's an untractable swampland full of death and sadness, and so no one can live there. So eventually, because it was deemed untamable, Gulf America just kind of gave it to the state, where they've been slowly buying it piece by piece from the people who were scammed to make this nature preserve. It is also the history of the Seminole tribe, who were pushed out of their original homelands further and further west by expansion by American pioneers and settlers, eventually being pushed here and there, and then ending up in southern Florida, which was considered deeply undesirable until it wasn't, until someone wanted something from that area. It is an amazing story of resilience of the Seminole people, who were the first, again, to look at what the government was offering them and use their own laws against them. They were some of the first people to set up casinos, because they were exempt from the laws that related to what is deemed non-Indian land. It is also the story of collectors. You really do begin to see that orchid collecting is an obsession, and really that some people are just born with that gene, is that once they start owning something or start collecting something, they cannot stop. It's an illness. It's even described by some of the people who are involved as a drug. Once you get your first orchid, you got to get them all, like a really pointless Pokemon. It and all around this is Susan Orlean's trying to make sense of who Laroche is. Who is John Laroche? This enigma, this botanist, this deeply amoral man, but maybe a genius, but maybe not. As she travels around with him and gets deeper and deeper into the orchid world, trying to understand his passion, trying to understand the passion of other orchid collectors, as she herself seems to lack that particular gene that gets her interested in that kind of thing. It is a lovingly meandering, full of interludes and detours and little historical details. It was famously turned into a film by Charlie Kaufman, where Orlean had a affair with John Laroche, which she absolutely did not in real life, and was a little taken aback when she got the script. But she got to be played by Meryl Streep, so she seems to have made peace with that. If you are looking for kind of a deep dive into a subject that, if you're like me, you don't care about at all, but is still very interesting, if you're a big fan of Sarah Vowell, or if you just want to know why people will pay thousands of dollars for a this can kind of explain it for you. It is a fun, very enjoyable read. Even though it is a little bit older, I would definitely recommend picking it up. You will learn so much about orchids, just a painful amount, just a horrible amount of facts about orchids. But you'll be happier for it.
Will you? Will you be happy for it? I don't know.
I'm like mildly like intrigued by the idea. I did, okay, because I kind of, I'm like, oh, she's talking about like different orchids, like they look like this, so I Googled them and I was like, oh, they're all like ugly. They're all really ugly. I don't see it. I don't see it, but I don't collect things, so I don't understand that obsession to have it all.
Yeah, but that's the wow thing, right? Like it's just trying to figure out this, I'll just stick to collecting squishmallows. I think that's what I would do. And by the way, orchid-based Pokemon is called Lorantis. So there you go. That I will collect. Anyway, so yeah, so that is thank you, Corinne, for that wild orchid book. Now you're full of orchid knowledge. Maybe you can get into one of those collecting business. Seller. As a
Absolutely
seller.
not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Oh no, because you have to have the right connections and like the right orchid legacy, and you need to like be in the orchid community.
Maybe that's something Evie can get into. Maybe.
Maybe if she gets that green thumb, maybe she can grow them.
Yeah. Millions of dollars.
There you go. Yeah. Buy mom and dad a nice big house somewhere.
There you go.
Works for me.
You will have to live in Florida though, because all their other environments are inhospitable to orchids because they are very, very specific to the area that they are grown in.
It's true. And it's way too hot and humid in Florida. I don't think I could do
Yeah.
it. I don't think they have fall or other seasons. So
Yeah. And
Don't
there's
think I
way
could
too
do
many
it.
bugs. The bugs are scary there.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
There's
You end up
a
underwater
million
eventually
gators.
too.
Well, like, okay, that is the history of Florida, is just some guy being like, yeah, I'll throw a ton of sand in the ocean. Now it's Miami. That's just what they do. Oh, this is a swamp. Well, I'll plant some trees in it. And now it's like a suburb. For how long? And it's full of alligators. It's full of alligators. And people like wrestle them for fun.
They have this like snake hunts too now, I think, because there's so many snakes. Or is that somewhere else?
no.
I
So
can't
many-
remember.
no,
Somewhere in
oh,
the
they
south,
also
they have
have
snake
snakes.
hunts.
No.
Yeah,
No,
They
no,
have
no.
don't worry about
everything. Any gross things you
They've
can
got
think
it
of,
all.
they've got it. Yeah.
So many bugs. And it's so like all I think of now when I think of Florida, because she goes into the swamp trying to find this ghost orchid, which like take a picture and like email it. But anyways, all I could think of when like she was like walking on was just like that's like the background soundtrack of this entire book.
Oh, thank you. Well, with that image in our mind and that sound that is going to play, we're going to try to focus on Mark's book, and see what kind of plant book they have for us.
I'll try and get that smushing sound out of everyone's minds, hopefully, because it's now in my head. I know that. But thankfully, my book will have a little bit more Zen kind of nature, plants and trees and things like that. So I will be talking about a mountain to the north, a lake to the south, paths to the west, a river to the east by László Krasznahorkai. Krasznahorkai may be one of the most well-known and well-regarded Hungarian writers in the world writing today. Several of his novels since the early 2000s have been drawing more and more attention in translation. Originally, his works were not quite as well known, but it seems like in more recent years, some publishers like New Directions have been bringing out some of his past works. So, for example, this novel was translated into English last year, but was released originally like about a decade and a half earlier. So Krasznahorkai is also known for some of his previous works, including Seobo There Below, which won the 2015 Man Booker International Prize. And he's also somewhat known within film circles for his collaborations with the fellow Hungarian filmmaker Béla Tarr for adaptations of his novels, including the nearly 7-hour-long adaptation of his novel Satan Tango. Because they just wanted the full experience of that novel in film form. So it's nearly 7 hours long. You better get the DVD so you're not going to sit through that in the theater, I don't think. That's going to be the thing that Crean will remember about this is the 7-hour-long movie book. We've all got something to drive Crean up the wall today. 7-hour movie book is mine. So, anyways, in this particular book, we follow the wanderings of the grandson of Prince Genji, the famed general ruler of the Tale of Genji, an epic narrative written in the early 11th century Japan. This wandering person is never given a name of his own and is only referred to as by his relation to this figure of Prince Genji. Somehow still living in the early 21st century, this out of time or timeless wanderer is in search of the 100th and final garden of his prized book, 100 Beautiful Gardens, the most treasured and loved book in his collection. His wandering has lasted presumably about a millennium now as he roams the country in search of this elusive 100th garden. With a silent passion, he searches and wonders if this garden has ever even existed, but nonetheless, he continues to wander in search of the simple perfection promised by the 100th and final garden, the secrets and tranquility it is said to have. This wandering has brought him to a remote and abandoned monastery in the mountains, hoping that this long journey will finally reach its end. Upon arriving at the monastery, he feels a gentle breeze, like that of serenity itself, sort of swept across the grandson of Prince Genji's delicate body and constitution, like a gentle caress. This caress digresses into a reflection on the various winds of nature, winds that are playful, dangerous winds, predominant winds, geostrophic winds, and winds of all 12 forces of the Beaufort scale. These are the kinds of like wandering, meandering kind of thoughts and feelings and reflections that sort of go on in this book. It takes a kind of Zen, almost Buddhist approach to thinking about nature and things like that, but also this kind of scientific, modern kind of aspect to it as well, of like how nature is measured and calculated and thought about in a scientific kind of way. These two kind of elements blend together in a kind of interesting way that I wasn't expecting when I started reading it. Upon his entry into the monastery, you become acquainted with its various aspects, like its layout, its wings and locations, the bell tower, communal areas, and things like this, as it has stood for more than a millennium and is now abandoned. It's sort of in like a decaying state, but still the kind of timeless aspects of the gardens, of the grounds, of the sort of aesthetic design qualities of this area, and the various artifacts, scrolls, and sutras that are located within it, sort of are reflected upon within the narrative. And the book itself is told from the perspective of a kind of disembodied, omniscient narrator, rather than like any specific character, because there's actually very little dialogue or very few even characters in the story itself. It's mostly just the grandson of Prince Genji, as well as some reflections that go back to before the monastery was even built, the different artisans and different people who contributed to the creation of this particular location. One space that is described in a particularly striking manner is the white gravel surfaces, the sands in the gardens, sculpted and milled into precise shapes and sizes, arranged into formations like the undulations of waves to evoke the ocean's restlessness in a form both simple and beautiful. And taken together, the sort of singularity of the artisanship and the circumstances around the monastery itself led to the complexity of making these grounds, in Krasznahorkai's words, incalculably monumental. It's kind of a singular beauty, a singular kind of place that, even though it had these kind of artisanal aesthetic works put into it, the way that it's located within this particular topography in this particular time and space makes it sort of like unique and singular in that way. So basically, as he wanders through this particular monastery, a wandering protagonist is quite tired and frequently stops to rest. And in his rest, we're sort of transported back in time to stories and descriptions of the creation of the monastery and the different things that went into its creation. This includes the artisans who worked to create this place, the artifacts within it, the travels of the natural resources that went into creating it, and the meaning attached to this creation by various people over time. So with one particular chapter that describes the process of selecting trees from the surrounding mountains, the methods of felling the trees, chopping and disassembling them, transporting them, selecting cuts for different uses, treating the cuts, assembling them into products, and then their placement and importance within the monastery are all expounded upon by our sort of omniscient narrator. Other chapters are more focused on the development of the natural environment itself. Example of this is the description of a particular group of hinoki trees in the courtyard that originated in a forest in China near the city of Tishan in Shandong province. The narrator details the journey of the pollen spores by wind over thousands of kilometers, with the number of wind hazards, rains, and places they could have landed that will result in the end of the spores before they could ever germinate. Even after germinating, the attendant risks of extreme weather, insects, beetles, and slugs that could snack on them and devour them, the young sprouting tree in its infancy before it could become a truly grown tree. To the days of growing tall and proud with lush foliage and majesty, as though they were bearing a hidden message, the story of their existence, beyond the knowledge and comprehension of any human who gazed upon them in the monastery's courtyard. So in this way, there's kind of like I almost sort of describe it as like Zen or Buddhist kind of reflection on the role of nature being independent of human existence, but also its relation to human modification and the use of nature by humans for their own sort of purposes in creating the monastery. And the title of the book itself comes from the surroundings of the monastery itself, and is a reference to what are called the 4 great prescriptions of a monastery's construction, and that should be protected by a mountain to the north, a lake to the south, paths to the west, and a river to the east, so as to designate perfectly the intentions, the dimensions, and the objective of the construction of the monastery and its layout. In turn, it's a reflection on life, time, being, aesthetics, and history in a sort of compact and poetic form. Krasznahorkai's writing is it's written in sort of standard prose like you would expect from a novel, but it's very poetic in the kind of details it picks up on, in the way it tries to change your perception of certain things, to pick up on details of things that you may not normally think about or perceive when looking at these kinds of constructions or aspects of nature. So I found that aspect of the story very interesting. And so if you like books that gently and gradually envelop you like a delicate wind, that just sort of like washes over you in a way, because it's not really like a narrative driven book. There's not like major events, like there's nothing like earth shattering that happens in this story. It's just about the gradual feeling of this place, the things that went into it, and all the gradual development over this millennium of time. If you're a fan of atmospheric books or enjoy books that with the meticulous attention to detail, then you may also like A Mountain to the North, A Lake to the South, Paths to the West, and A River to the East by László Krasznahorkai.
Thank you, Mark. It feels like a book that would be like a 7-hour book.
I love that the review is like, well, nothing happens. It's more of like a vibe.
But sometimes that's what you want, right? Like just, to be in there in the zone, that you feel that, philosophical musings that give you time to think and reflect. Doesn't have to be all plans that kill people. And
someone might have some of those mushrooms from Fiona's book and then read this and just have like a transcendent experience, I think.
Well, thank you everyone for bringing all kinds of plant, mushrooms, books to the episode today. Hope you will join us again next week for another episode. So have a great day and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.